Good evening all and welcome. Tonight we're going to be heading into some abandoned buildings for a creepy collection of scary stories. So get comfortable and let the darkness take control. One of my close friends lived next to a house that was always vacant. It would sell, a family would move in, and then just as suddenly they'd be gone, the for sale sign back in the yard. No one ever stayed long. One summer the house was empty again, and in our infinite teenage wisdom we decided to go check it out. We had just picked up some Jack-in-the-Box, and for whatever reason we thought it would be fun to play chicken with whatever was haunting the place. The back door was locked, but my friend was skinny enough to squeeze through the door dog that led straight into the kitchen. He unlocked the door for me, and we stepped inside. The place wasn't anything special, just a typical 50s bungalow with lots of built-ins and pretty woodwork. It had almost the same layout as my friend's house, which made it feel even less eerie. Room by room we checked everything out. Nothing weird, no bad vibes. We were almost disappointed, to be honest, so we sat down in the dining area to eat. Across from us was a built-in breakfast nook, a horseshoe-shaped bench with a table in the middle. The windows had no curtains, and even though dusk was settling in, the city lights outside kept it from ever getting too dark. By now, we'd been in the house for maybe 25 minutes. We'd finished eating but stuck around, just chatting. Then mid-sentence, everything changed. My vision went black. Not like the room got dark, not like my eyes adjusted to a shadow. It was instant total blindness. At the same time, a wave of freezing cold washed over me. It wasn't just a chill, it sank deep into my bones, a heavy, suffocating cold. Then my friend screamed. I tried to move, but I couldn't see. I reached out groping for anything to grab onto. The air felt thick, almost like it was pressing in on me, and my whole body felt wrong, like something was crawling inside my skin. Suddenly I felt my friend's hand grab mine. He yanked me up and started dragging me through the house towards the back door. I stumbled after him, completely blind, barely able to keep my balance. He was pulling so hard, nearly ripping my arm from my socket. We made it outside. The second I stepped over the threshold, a shiver shot through me, but not a normal shiver. It started at my toes and crawled up my body, all the way to the top of my head like something was peeling itself off me. And just like that I could see again. I turned to my friend. He was pale as a sheep, breathing hard and staring at me, like I was something unrecognizable. I felt off. I finally found my voice and said, I couldn't see. It was like I was swallowed in darkness. My friend just kept looking at me. Why did you scream? I asked. Instead of answering, he pulled me into a hug, his whole body shaking. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely above a whisper. Because the second you started reaching around like you were blind, a little girl crawled out from under the table. What? She was dark like shadow, not like a person. In the dark, just all black, but I could see through her. My stomach dropped. She climbed on you. She sat on top of you. And that's all I had to hear. We left shortly after. When I was 14, my family lived in a rural pocket of Oklahoma, just outside a small, decaying town called Fairland. If you've never heard of it, you're not missing much. Crumbling storefronts, boarded-up houses, and a low, constant buzz of trouble. Theft, drug deals, missing people. The whole place felt tired, like it'd seen too much and didn't want to see any more. I had two close friends, brothers who lived nearby, and we'd kill time doing kid stuff together, biking, slingshots, sneaking smokes behind sheds. Most of it was harmless, but that summer afternoon, something pulled us off our usual path. We were deep in the back roads, pedaling through overgrown fields and tangled wood, where the cicadas screamed so loud you could barely think straight. The houses out here were ghosts, some lived in, most rotting. And that's when we saw it, a house half swallowed by the trees. You really wouldn't notice it unless you were looking for it. The siding was greyed out, warped and flaking, ivy-choked, like the veins on a corpse, and an old truck, maybe a 70s Ford, was rusting into the earth out front, tires long gone, windows filmed over with grime and pollen. The front door wouldn't budge. My friend gave me a boost through a jagged bathroom window, glass still hanging in the frame like teeth. I eased through, careful not to slice myself open, and let the others through the front door. The door screeched on its hinges, echoing through the house, and inside it smelt like wet earth, piss, and old rot. The carpet was soaked and black in places, the floorboards soft enough to punch through if you weren't careful. Personal belongings were still scattered everywhere. Clothes, newspapers, even a TV. It was as if the family had just vanished one day mid-step. The plates were still on the table, a coat draped over the chair, and everything layered in thick, undisturbed dust. We started exploring room by room. In what looked like the master bedroom, we found half a pair of handcuffs attached to the base of a rusted wall heater. The metal was stained and warped, like someone had tried to tear it free. And the wall behind it was scratched, deep gouges almost like fingernails. It didn't look like a joke or kink gone wrong. It looked like desperation. In the kids' bedroom, we found family photos scattered across the floor. A man in uniform, a woman, a little girl with wild curly hair, maybe 5 or 6. The photos had been trampled, some torn in half, but her room was frozen in time, with Barbies still on the floor and a dusty pink blanket on the bed and a mobile hanging above it. But the air was ice cold. We decided to try the attic, but the stairs had collapsed, so we dragged over broken chairs and cinder blocks until we had a sketchy platform, and I climbed up first. The attic was hotter than hell, but something had clearly been living up there. A sleeping bag, trash, moldy food wrappers, and dog tags hanging from a nail in the rafters, a stack of filthy magazines, and a pipe crusted with black resin. My friend found a spoon and a belt tied in a loop. Whoever was squatting up there had left in a hurry, but the worst came later. We stepped back out, and I slipped, just vanished into the ground like the earth had opened up and eaten me. I'd fallen through a cellar entrance, hidden under a warped sheet of thin tin and a mat of dead leaves. The drop wasn't far, but I landed hard enough to knock the wind out of myself. It was pitch black. Dirt floor, walls made of crumbling stone, and I felt something soft under my hand. Fabric. When I turned on my friend's lighter, I saw them. Tiny bones, scattered and half buried, tangled in a child's dress. The colors were faded, but the size were unmistakable. I told myself they were animal bones, but I had to know. I clawed out of that pit like something was chasing me, even though nothing was, not visibly. But I've never felt fear like that before or since, like the darkness wanted to eat me whole. The sun was sinking when we left. The shadows in the house seemed to stretch longer, like they just didn't want us to go. We pedaled home in silence. No jokes were made, no laughs were had. Not a word. We never talked about it much after that, just buried like the bones in the cellar. Years later I still think about that place, about the handcuffs, the little girl's room, the attic squatter, and the bones. About the sense that something terrible had happened there. I don't need a ghost to show itself to know that some places, you just feel like whatever happened there is still happening just beneath the surface, waiting for someone dumb enough to open that door again. And I was that someone. But never again. It was the late spring of 2000, when my boyfriend and I stumbled upon the most disturbing place I'd ever explored. I'm an experienced urban explorer. I've seen crumbling asylums, collapsed tunnels, and the eerie echoes of abandoned theaters. But nothing could have prepared me for what we found in the forested hills of Oro Medonte, Ontario. Back then, the location wasn't well known. No geotags, no YouTube walkthroughs. It was just a forgotten estate my boyfriend had spotted from a rooftop while working a job. What stood at the time would later be known as the Stone Castle or Ulster Castle to the locals. But to us, it was a mystery veiled in trees and shadows, sitting on a hill far from the road, the outer stone shell of a mission long since gutted by fire and surrounded by outbuildings slowly rotting to death. The first time we pulled up to the winding overgrown path, the place felt timeless, remote, like it was waiting to be discovered again. My boyfriend was hesitant, he always was, but I was buzzing with excitement. I needed to know what secrets these forgotten walls were still holding. The barn was first. We climbed through a warped wooden door hanging off its hinge. Inside, sunbeams pierced holes in the roof and lit up clouds of dust. Upstairs was harmless, just rusted tools, hay piles, old boards. But then we ventured into the lower level, and it hit us immediately. The basement was large, damp, and cloaked in shadow. The concrete walls were covered in disturbing, chaotic symbols drawn in red and black. On the floor stood a makeshift altar surrounded by burnt-down black candles. A butcher knife sat near, stained dark. Next to it a bottle filled with something thick and reddish-brown, and the air reeked of mold and iron. But the worst part was the silo attached to the barn. It had been converted into a cage, welded bars, chains bolted to the concrete, claw marks gouged onto the inner walls. My boyfriend wanted to leave right there and then, but I brushed it off, trying to rationalize that it was kids just messing around and trying to scare people. He didn't look convinced. Honestly, neither was I, but I still pushed on. The stable was next. It was tucked away at the back of the property, half sunk into a gentle slope of the land. When I opened the door, the smell was like a gut punch, rot, decay, and the thick stench of death. Inside were dozens of animal corpses in various states of decomposition. Cats, dogs, rabbits, even wild animals like foxes and coyotes. Their bodies twisted, some skinned, others eviscerated, and the flies buzzed so loudly it was honestly disgusting. My boyfriend looked at me and said, "We're leaving now." I didn't argue, but as we made our way back up the path, I saw the carriage house, a quiet, squat, red-bricked structure with ivy swallowing its side. I had to look, just a peek. My boyfriend stormed ahead, assuming I was behind, but I wasn't. I crept around the side, opened the door, and nothing. Empty, dusty, and anticlimactic. But if I hadn't veered off that detour, we wouldn't have seen them coming. When I stepped back out and looked up the hill, I froze. A man was standing next to our car. He had the door open and was rummaging through the glove box, and a baseball bat leaned against his leg. He wasn't alone. Behind him emerged a slow-moving group, maybe 8 in total, men, women, even 2 kids no older than 12. Every single one of them held something in their hand, whether it be a bat, a stick, a cane, even a golf club. They looked like they'd been waiting. I screamed at the man by our car, and my boyfriend came flying over the hill, wild-eyed and ready to fight. The group scattered suddenly, startled by our confrontation. Some tried to hide their weapons behind their backs as if we hadn't seen them already. "Who the hell are you?" the man inquired. "We could ask you the same. Get out of our car." He didn't answer, he just started fidgeting. My boyfriend quickly lied, said we were admiring the architecture and leaving. And somehow they let us. We got into the car, locked the doors, and drove away fast. But they followed. A black pickup with no license plate kept tailing us for nearly 20 minutes. We didn't head home. We bolted straight to Barry and filed a police report. Even the cops looked spooked. Said that he'd heard a few rumors about that place. My boyfriend never went back to that roofing job. He had someone else finish it, and I tried to return, but no one would go with me. Years later, my cousin, also an explorer, bought up a spot she wanted to check out. She sent me a pin. Of course, it was the same castle, and now we've made plans to return. But this time, if those guys come back, we'll be ready for them. To any explorers out there, always carry a knife, tell someone where you're going and trust your instincts. Not every building is empty. Not every place is truly forgotten. There's an old, forgotten church about 20 minutes outside of town, tucked into a stretch of dense wood off a disused country road. No signs, no clear path, just trees, silence, and a building that shouldn't be standing. Most people around here pretend it doesn't exist. Most of them probably don't know it does. But if you grew up nearby, you might have heard the rumors of Saint Alora's. But no one remembers who Alora was. They say the church burnt down a long time ago and was rebuilt, but then, for some reason, abandoned. No one worshipped there anymore. The place was left to rot, swallowed in vines, roof caving in. Behind it, past the cracked grave markers and crumbling stone, was a wooden panel, warped like sun-bleached, bolted over what looks like a door in the ground. It's more a fake door, really. No hinges, no handle, just boards nailed haphazardly over something that someone clearly didn't want opened. But one weekend, me and 3 of my mates decided to check it out. We'd been bored chasing urban legends and filming creepy TikToks in abandoned spots. This was supposed to be another dumb adventure, but something about that church just creeped us out before we even went in. The fake door I had mentioned had already been smashed in. Splinters made it look like it had happened recently, not by animals either. Looked like it had been kicked in by human feet, or done in by a sledgehammer. We debated going in, but I convinced the others to wait. I wanted to know exactly what the hell we were walking into. I did some digging, and found a few buried mentions of an entity called the Blue Drum Boy, a ghost, supposedly a child drummer, killed in some skirmish long ago. His remains were never found, but a legend said he marched the tunnels forever, echoing in the dark. I laughed it off. My friend Jamie, who's into the whole paranormal thing, brought a crucifix and some kind of protective charm. I packed a 500 lumen torch, extra batteries, walkie-talkies and rope, just in case. So we went out at 1:30 a.m. There were no streetlights out there, obviously. No wind, just the trees whispering when you moved past too quickly. The entrance led to stone steps spiraling into the earth, and as soon as we passed the threshold, everything felt heavier. Not thicker, not colder. Just like we were in somewhere we weren't meant to be. But perhaps that was just the unease in my head. The tunnel was narrow and damp. Clearly, if it was ever meant for human use, those humans were a hell of a lot shorter than we were now. And none of us spoke as we made our way. The silence was too complete, even our footsteps muted on the dirty stone floor. At the base, the passage turned sharply about 90 degrees to the right. The beam from my torch couldn't pierce the bend. No one wanted to be first. Jamie stuck a red flare and tossed it around the corner. The flare hissed and lit up the cellar. There were rusted metal tables, stained blankets, and hundreds of glass shards. The place reeked of mold and iron. But what got us were the fresh blood smears across the floor, leading to a darkened hallway at the far end. The doorway led to a smaller tunnel, and on the floor was a heavy iron grate, a rusted ladder that vanished into the darkness below. It was locked with a thick chain, but someone had already cut through it. The links dangled like someone had just slipped past. The 3 of us climbed down. My friend Connor, the heaviest, waited until last, and halfway down the corroded metal shrieked and gave way, and the ladder folded in on itself like paper, and Connor plummeted to the floor below with a sickening crunch. He screamed once and then just cried. The tunnel we landed in was unlike the rest. The air reeked here, and the wall had what appeared to be fingernail scratches embedded into the stone itself. We had to carry Connor, both ankles shattered, quietly crying as we pushed forward with no way back. We passed dead rats, skeletons of other small animals, and Jamie kept whispering prayers. At one point we had to step around a pile of what looked like children's shoes, very old-fashioned. We'd only been underground for about 8 minutes at this point, and honestly, we were terrified. We had no idea how we were going to get out, and it's wild how time stretches when your adrenaline is maxed out, and the dark feels like it's pushing in on you, especially when there's no way for you to escape now. At the end of that last tunnel, we found another rusted ladder, climbing up into the unknown. I offered to go first again. Every rung groaned under my weight, but it held. I pushed open the hatch and pulled myself into what looked like a storeroom, maybe once part of the rectory. Wooden crates stacked against the stone walls, long rotted, their contents mouldy and unrecognizable, the ceiling sagging in places, and cobwebs and dust hanging thick. And that's when I saw him, slumped in the corner, almost invisible. Behind a pile of broken chairs and debris was a man. He was curled in on himself, knees tucked in, arms wrapped tightly around them, his clothes ragged and stained, his skin a very sickly shade of grey-green. One arm extended slack, with a needle still embedded in the vein. His eyes were open, but they weren't seeing. Glassy, distant, like whatever he'd been looking at in those final moments was too awful to look away from. He wasn't moving, not even the slow shift of breath. I stood frozen. I wasn't scared in the way horror movies make you jump. I was just hollowed out, like my brain had stopped working and everything inside me went quiet. This wasn't a legend, a ghost story, or some dumb urban myth. This was a dead man. I backed down the ladder and told the others. No one asked if he was alive. We just knew. They didn't ask to see. Jamie was already pale, clutching his charm like it was the only thing keeping him upright. Connor was still completely quiet and in absolute agony. We hoisted him up through the hatch. It took everything we had, and still to this day I'm not entirely sure how we managed to get him up. But we got him into the room and back outside through a crumbling service door, half swallowed by ivy. We hit the tree line and didn't stop moving until we reached the car. It was probably one of the longest walks back I've ever had, and it took us about 5 times the amount of time it took us just to get there. No one spoke on the drive to the hospital. We didn't report the body. We couldn't. It would have meant admitting that we'd been trespassing, breaking into sealed property. We made up some cock-and-bull story about Connor falling through a floor in a barn. The nurse barely raised an eyebrow. But it stayed with us. The quiet eyes, the way he looked like he'd died waiting for something to come and get him and no one ever had. That night didn't end with ghosts or jump scares, no monsters in the shadows, but somehow that made it worse, because what we saw was real and unforgettable. A slow death alone in the dark, beneath a forgotten church no one talks about. And I still think about him sometimes, how long he'd been there, how he'd got there, and why he was down there in the first place. I'm not sure if that building is even there anymore. I mean, the town is pretty remote, and if there was any intention of bulldozing that place and building something else, I think it'd be slim. Who knows? To this day, he still might be there. A skeleton, with a needle, sticking out where his arm used to be. I'm not the kind of guy who gets spooked easily. I've worked around water systems for most of a decade now. Meter reading, line maintenance, infrastructure inspections, you name it. Most of the time it's routine stuff. Sometimes frustrating, sometimes disgusting, but never really unsettling. But that changed a few years ago. Our town's monthly water loss report came back to almost double the usual rate, 12%. That's a massive discrepancy when you're talking about thousands of gallons. Something wasn't up. Either a major line was leaking somewhere, or there was unauthorized usage, maybe even theft. It was urgent, not just because of the environmental impact, but because the city would be bleeding money every day if it went unfixed. So the department organized a full-scale sweep. 40 of us split up into teams, each taking a section of town. My sector included the old Miller water treatment plant, a concrete cathedral dedicated to machinery and pipes, massive chambers, eerie echo chambers, rusting metal, and the constant smell of damp stone and rot. The Miller plant hadn't been operational since '05. It was abandoned when they built the new factory on the east side of town. No electricity, no maintenance, nothing. It just sat there decaying like an untouched fossil. Most folks avoided the place. Even the kids joked about how it was haunted. Though that's just small town banter. I went with my co-worker Jeremy. He'd been around even longer than I had, and remembered when the Miller plant was still in operation. We pulled up mid-afternoon, but the place already felt oddly dim. Ivy had crawled halfway up the outer walls, and one of the massive steel doors at the rear was rotting off its hinges. Inside, it felt like we were stepping into a different century. The ground floor had wide concrete walkways suspended over massive rectangular pools. These tanks had once held thousands of gallons of treated water, but now they were filled with still black liquid, more sludge than water. You couldn't see more than an inch below the surface, and the smell was intense. We walked cautiously, flashlights cutting through the murk, checking pipes, valves, everything that might hint of a leak. It was quiet, no dripping, no echoes, no breeze. Even our footsteps felt muffled. The only signs of life were a few skeletal pigeons and scattered feathers. I kept catching myself glancing over my shoulder. At the far end of the walkway was a rusted spiral staircase that led down into a very dry slump pit. Jeremy said it's where the old isolation valves were. Nothing unusual. We climbed halfway down, checked things out, no sign of water loss. I was relieved, to be honest. The place wasn't sitting well with me. That's when Jeremy remembered the lab upstairs. He got this nostalgic look in his eye, like he was about to show me something cool from a forgotten time. I figured we had a few minutes. The lab was on the second floor, so we climbed another set of creaking stairs up along a long hallway of office doors. The walls were yellowed from age, paint peeling like sunburned skin, and every door was labeled with fading block letters: supervisor, locker room, maintenance, and finally, laboratory. We stepped inside. It was like a museum. Dust covered every surface, rusting cabinets stood half open, shelves held ancient beakers and cracked glass tubes, and papers littered the floor. The far wall had a line of tall metal lockers. I opened a few out of curiosity, but all of them were empty. Beside them were the bathroom, cracked porcelain sinks, mirrors fogged with time, and greenish stains creeping up the tiles. Beside those was a final door, partially ajar, probably a supply closet, I figured. There was nothing in there. And as I was walking back, I heard a high-pitched laugh. That of a child. Not a playful giggle, but something wrong. It echoed through the lab, bouncing off the concrete walls, cutting straight through me. Jeremy heard it too. He froze, eyes wide. "Did you—" he started, but I was already backing up. "There's no one here," I muttered, shining my light into the dark closet. Nothing, just shelves, some old uniform and mop, and the heavy smell of mildew. "Maybe it was a bird," Jeremy said, voice shaky. "No birds laugh like that," I snapped more aggressively than I meant to. We stood there in stunned silence, listening for anything else. But there wasn't anything else, just the creaking of old buildings and the occasional drip of water somewhere in the distance. We checked every room on that floor, every closet, every hallway. Not a soul. No footprints. Nothing. But that laugh, it had echoed too perfectly, too clearly, like it came from a recording or outside, but like the source had been right there in the room with us. We left quietly, walking quickly, not running but not lingering either. As we stepped back out into the sunlight, everything suddenly felt normal again. Wind rustling through the trees, birds chirping, but neither of us spoke until we got back in the truck. "You, hear anything like that before there?" Jeremy shook his head. "Nah, and ain't going back." Neither of us filed anything about what happened in our report. There was no water loss at that site after all. But here's the part that really bothers me. Out of morbid curiosity, I did a little digging later. Turns out back in the 60s, a worker's child drowned in one of the tanks. Why they were there in the first place, I can't say. She slipped away from her dad and fell in, and they didn't find the body for hours. There's no plaque, no record in the plant, just a buried story from an old local paper. I don't believe in ghosts, or at least, I didn't. In Oakland, I broke into what could only be described as a fortress built by a paranoid ghost. From the outside, it looked like just another abandoned warehouse. Rusted panels, spray-painted tags, windows shattered or boarded up with splintering plywood. But once you were inside, it was clear this place was engineered for someone who expected the end of the world, or maybe started it. Some people said it used to be some kind of urban survivalists, a guy who hoarded canned food and ammo and built his own bunkers before vanishing. Then the drug scene took over. Then it was abandoned again, left to rot in silence while the city grew louder around it. I found my way in through a section of collapsed roof, metal grating and twisting and half-hanging like a broken jaw. The smell hit first though, piss, mildew and coppery blood, and something sweetly rotten that it clung to the inside of your throat. Inside, the place was a graveyard of addiction. Thousands, and no exaggeration, of used needles littered the concrete floor. They cracked under my boot like broken glass. In some room, hidden behind a loose panel in the drywall, I found an untouched box of fresh needles, still shrink-wrapped, like someone planned to come back, or never left. Every door in the place had been modified. Thick steel bars, pipes welded into anchors, locks layered over locks. Some doors were barricaded from inside, others from outside, like whoever built couldn't decide whether to keep danger out or keep something worse in. A rust-covered staircase led up to a mezzanine, blocked at the top by a massive steel hatch, like the kind you'd see on a ship. It could be dropped shut using a system of thick cables and rusted pulleys bolted to the first floor. I tested them and they still worked. Painted in massive red letters on top of one of the concrete walls were two jagged initials, SS. I joked to myself that it probably stood for super secret, but deep down it didn't feel like a joke. There were secret doors built into the walls, so well disguised I nearly passed them altogether. Inside was a narrow passageway with walls built from wooden studs, oddly close together, just 6 inches apart, and finished on only one side. At the end of that passage was another hidden room. This one was different. The floor was bare, the walls were unfinished, covered in scratches fingernail deep, and in places dug down to the wood grain. And the only door? It locked from the outside. No handle, no latch, nothing on the inside, just a hole someone could be shoved in and left, quietly and forever. I stood there staring into that little room. Something about it felt wrong, like the air was too still, too quiet. There were rumors I heard before of a tunnel beneath a warehouse that ran under the street, maybe connecting to the subway system or an old storm drain, but I never found the entrance. Maybe I was never supposed to. I didn't stay much longer after that. You can tell yourself that you're just exploring decay, that there's nothing supernatural here, just rust and rot and human tragedy. But there's something about these places, like they were designed to hide secrets and silence people, that doesn't sit right with me. Sometimes it's not what you just find in the walls, it's what the walls remember. I was born in Moscow in the early 90s, but this story belongs to my older brother, who grew up in a very different Russia. He was born in 1980, and by the late 80s, he was just a street-hardened kid running through a country barely holding itself together. Back then, Russia didn't feel like a country. It felt like the aftermath of something. Buildings were collapsing. Authority was more rumor than reality, and you could damn near buy anything off the street. One time my dad was offered a rocket launcher in an open-air market, no joke. You get the idea. The chaos trickled down to everything, including kids. Parents let us roam free through bombed-out factories and abandoned apartment blocks, and we took full advantage. My brother and his crew were what you'd call destructive, lighting homemade fireworks indoors, trying to make smoke bombs out of matches and soda bottles. Their playgrounds were places most people wouldn't go alone in daylight. Crumbling Soviet buildings with no roofs, pitch-black basements, and endless hallways full of broken glass and graffiti and blood-red spray paint. There were no warning signs because everyone already knew. One day they were messing around in one of those old abandoned buildings, throwing rocks through windows, lighting paper on fire just to watch it curl, when one of his friends spotted something. "Someone's over there," he said. At first they didn't pay much attention. People lurked in those places all the time. Drunks, squatters, weirdos, you got used to it. But this guy was different. He wasn't hiding, he was just watching. Just standing in the shadow, as still as a corpse. Then he stepped into the light. He was a big man, bald, towering, with a thick black coat that looked way too nice for that part of town. It was clean and almost new and definitely foreign, probably imported. It looked expensive. And on his feet, American sneakers. Pristine white, glowing against the dust and grime like they didn't belong to this world. He didn't say hello. He didn't ask what they were doing. He just stood there, eyes scanning them like a butcher at the counter. My brother said he was staring at the shoes. They looked surreal, like something from a commercial. The man must have noticed because without missing a beat he said, "Like my shoes? I have more. Come on, I'll show you." That's all he said, but something about his voice didn't match the words. There was no friendliness in it, just cold, empty intent. Even for a group of chaos-loving Russian kids, something felt off, and all of them just froze. The man then turned slightly, and my brother spotted it. A firearm tucked into his waistband, barely hidden beneath the coat. "Gun!" the kids screamed, and after that the spell broke. They ran hard, not looking back, just sneakers pounding through ruined hallways and rusted stairs, pushing each other through narrow gaps and leaping down crumbling stairs. Somewhere behind them, they heard the man yell, but he didn't chase them. They didn't go back, not to that building, not for a long time. At first it was just another story, another creepy memory. They didn't talk about it. Russia was full of dangerous men, and most of them didn't care about kids unless they had a reason to. But weeks later, that building was suddenly off limits. Police tape, rumors, adults whispering in Russian too fast and too quietly for kids to understand. It wasn't until years later, long after the fear had dulled into nostalgia, that my brother learned the truth. A child had been found dead inside that same building, beaten to death with a rock. No one ever found out who did it. No one ever claimed they saw anything. But my brother knew. We all did. We just never wanted to admit it. He doesn't talk about it much. Says it's one of those memories that lives in the corner of his mind. Because the truth is, he and his friends weren't lucky because they were brave. They were lucky because they ran. And didn't end up like that poor kid. A few houses down from where I grew up, in this chill little suburban neighborhood, there was this old abandoned 3-story house, with peeling paint, broken windows, and surrounded by overgrown grass. It had this reputation, especially with local teens. Everyone knew something was off about that place, but of course, it just made the ultimate hangout for us when we were bored and looking for a spook. We used to explore the yard all the time, but the house itself was locked up tight. The owners still technically lived somewhere nearby and would seal the doors and windows every time someone broke in, which was often enough. But one night, me and 3 of my friends decided to pay it another visit, for old time's sake. It was a little past midnight, raining slightly, and we were all craving an adrenaline rush. When we got there, the whole place felt off. As it always did. The front door was locked, of course, and we tugged it for a while, until one of my friends kicked it and actually put his foot through the damn thing. Through the hole, we were able to reach around and unlock it from the inside. It had one of those old weird latches. With a creak that would wake the dead, we stepped into the darkness. The inside was claustrophobic. Narrow rooms, low ceilings, and this damp musty smell that clung to everything. It had a basement, main floor, and upstairs. We roamed around, mostly joking and catching up, trying to pretend we weren't already on edge. We ended up upstairs, chilling in what looked like a living room. No one dared sit on the moldy couch, so we just plopped down on the floor and talked about random stuff, mostly Clash Royale. Then we heard it, a creak from downstairs, and we all froze in complete silence. Another creak, then a loud bang, like something hit the floor hard. We looked at each other wide-eyed, trying to keep it together. I slowly leaned over the railing, just enough to peek down the stairs without giving myself away. I couldn't see anyone, but a table in the kitchen had been knocked over. Trying to play it cool, I whispered, "It's just the wind, knocked over a table or something." We all nervously laughed, brushing it off as one of those classic haunted house jump scares. But then right before we took a step down, we heard it. Running. Fast, heavy footsteps sprinting from the back of the house and straight out the back door. The sound was so sudden and real, one of my friends almost face-planted. We didn't wait to ask questions. We booked it out the front door like our lives depended on it, and didn't stop running until we were half a block away at my friend's place. On the way out, though, we saw the back door hanging off its hinges. At first, we laughed. Probably just another kid exploring who freaked out when he heard us upstairs, right? Yeah, we thought so too. A few days later, one of my friends spotted an interesting find in the local paper. Apparently, a homeless man, a known drug addict, had been living in the abandoned house. He was arrested for drug trafficking and squatting, and he'd been staying there for weeks. Now, I don't know what would have happened if we'd have gone down those stairs and he hadn't run. I still think about that. What if he hadn't been scared? What if he was desperate or high out of his mind? We got really lucky. But man, that place gives me the creeps. When I was 9, I found what I now know to be an abandoned bomb shelter. Though abandoned doesn't feel like the right word. It was more like buried, hidden beneath piles of broken bricks, rusted rebar, and cracked tiles left over from some long-forgotten construction project in the city outskirts of China. I'd passed by it plenty of times. There was always this rust-covered metal gate, tightly padlocked and almost swallowed up by the rubble. It gave off that feeling like the place itself didn't want to be found. But one day it was found. The gate was open, not wide, just barely ajar, like someone had slipped in and didn't bother to close it. The rubble had shifted too, revealing just enough space for a skinny kid to squeeze through. And being a curious 9-year-old idiot with more nerve than sense, I decided that meant I should check it out. There were no flashlights, no phones, just me in my scuffed sneakers and a pocket full of gum wrappers. The entrance led to a narrow concrete stairwell that seemed to fall straight into the earth. Cold air hit me the second I stepped inside, damp, heavy, and tinged with that strange metallic stink of wet rust on stagnant water. Each step I took down echoed too loudly, like the sound had nowhere better to go but back into my ears. I kept going anyway, gripping the side rail, a half-rotted pipe slick with something slimy, until the daylight behind me all but vanished. The further I went, the more it felt like I shouldn't be there, like I was being watched by something inhuman. Then, my foot hit water. Freezing, black, still water. I took one more step and it was already ankle deep, then calf deep. I couldn't see it, but I could feel it around me, like the darkness was rising up to swallow me. And that's when I felt something brush against my ankle. And then again. Then something else slid across the top of my foot, cold, slick, and fast. I couldn't see what it was. A snake? A fish? Something worse? I was too frozen with panic to even look. But something about the moment, the way the water seemed to ripple around me, like it was alive, put my survival instinct into overdrive. I turned and bolted. The water slowed me down, splashing loudly as I scrambled back up the stairs, practically clawing my way towards the light. My soaked shoes squelched and slipped on the concrete. My heart was thundering in my chest so loud I could barely hear myself think. I didn't stop running until I was outside, standing in the sun, chest heaving and soaked to the bone. My legs were scratched up. My clothes were dripping and I smelled awful. That wet earth, dead thing smell clung to me like mold. I think I told my parents I fell into a puddle or tripped near a ditch or something. I didn't ask too many questions. For years I convinced myself I imagined it, that I had just freaked out, that it was rats or frogs, or maybe even just floating garbage. But I still remember the way the water felt, how it wasn't still anymore once I stepped into it. It moved around me, and I never saw the gate open again, thankfully. My dad bought a house in the mountains of upstate New York back in the early 2000s. We were still living in the suburbs of Westchester at the time, so it became our weekend getaway. A fixer-upper surrounded by nothing but thick woods and winding dirt roads. My dad spent most weekends patching it up, and I spent most of mine running around the forest with my paintball gun, pretending I was in some kind of war movie. Out behind our house, tucked maybe 100 yards into the trees, was this decaying old home. I could see it perfectly from my bedroom window. A ghost of a place. Half the roof had been caved in, the walls were sagging, and the paint was long gone. It looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. Still, it was weirdly intact inside. Through the broken frame of what used to be a large bay window, you could see furniture covered in dusty sheets. An old Ford Fairlane, completely rusted out and swallowed by weeds, sat frozen in the driveway like an old tombstone. That house gave me the creeps even when the sun was out. One weekend, my cousin came to stay. We were both around 12 and brought out the paintball guns to shoot random stuff in the woods, typical dumb kid stuff. Eventually, we wandered over to the old house, standing in front of it. It felt off, like the whole forest got quieter. What was left of the windows was coated in dirt and thick cobwebs, like no one had been near the place in years. We decided to shoot them out, every single one. Glass shattered in satisfying bursts of color as we peppered the facade with bright neon paint. We laughed our asses off, finished off our ammo, and went back inside to play GTA 2 like nothing happened. The next weekend, I came up again with my parents but didn't go near the house. But the weekend after that, my cousin tagged along again, and we brought the paintball guns out for round 2. We were halfway through the woods when we stopped dead in our tracks. The windows were back, unbroken. Still dusty, still covered in pollen and cobwebs, but intact like no one had touched them. My cousin stared at them. "Didn't we?" "Yeah," I said. "We did." We stood there for a moment unsure of what we were even looking at. Then, like a couple of idiots trying to brush off the weirdness, we shot at them again. Same as before. Glass flying. Paint splattering. Still fun this time. It didn't feel like harmless vandalism. I felt like we were messing with something. After that weekend, we stopped going for a while. Life got in the way, school, sports, whatever. When we finally returned a few months later, the house was gone, demolished, bulldozed into nothing but overgrown rubble. To this day, I can't explain what happened with those windows. People I've told the story to usually go with the logical answer. Maybe someone came and replaced them. But who replaces the windows on a house that has no roof? Who installs glass into frames that are already rotted from decades of rain and snow, and doesn't clean the cobwebs but actually applies to them after doing the windows again? I've seen a lot of strange things out in the woods, heard stuff too, but this one still bugs me the most because it wasn't loud or violent or threatening. It simply didn't make sense. Back in the day, my friends and I treated ourselves to secret midnight adventures at an old boarded-up hospital on the edge of town. Every teenager in the neighborhood knew about it. An imposing 3-story relic with all its doors locked, every window tightly boarded up, and an aura of neglect that made it the perfect playground for those daring enough to trespass. The only way through was a battered shed on the side, climb up, jump up through a rusted car, and pry our way through a broken window. We had been in that place so many times that its creaking corridors and peeling paint had long since lost their initial creepiness. One night, for the thrill of nostalgia and a dash of mischief, the 4 of us decided to go up and up the ante. We resolved to venture into the basement, a place infamous for being constantly flooded. The basement was submerged in murky water, roughly 4 feet deep, obscuring everything beneath the surface. Down here, the building's secrets had been swallowed by time, leaving behind only a generator and the remnants of old shelves. Armored with our flashlights, we made our way down a set of decaying stairs, each step groaning underfoot as we reached the threshold of the hidden underworld. The hallway was beyond a narrow, endless stretch of darkness that swallowed our beams of light. Still, our flashlights revealed a little more than the outline of a generator. Drawing a collective breath, we resolved to begin our descent into the water. As we stepped into the shallow, stagnant pool, our flashlight bobbed in the inky depths. Every ripple we created was magnified in the murky water, and for a moment everything was unnervingly still. So still we could have sworn we heard our own hearts beating in tandem in the silence. Then, one of us, braver or perhaps more impulsive than the rest, cautiously placed a foot into the submerged step. The water rippled around him, sending a small cascade of ripples along the stairway. Before we could even say a word, a colossal splash erupted somewhere nearby, an impact so great it mimicked the echo of a cannonball plunging into a dark, vast pool. The sound reverberated through the hallway like a drumbeat. Panic seized us, and without hesitation we bolted back up the stairs. I craned my neck over the railing, peeking into the opaque water, only to see nothing except the trembling surface. Yet in that disquieting moment, I distinctly heard the unmistakable sound of a heavy presence moving slowly down the hall towards us. We were frightened beyond measure. We didn't stop until we reached the relative safety of the 2nd floor, where we scrambled to the exit and fled for the night. Hours later, with adrenaline still coursing through our veins, we dared to return. Driven by curiosity and the need to debunk our fears, we gathered at the top of those damp, ancient stairs once more. There we huddled, listening intently to the silence. One of us, braver or perhaps more reckless, tossed a flashlight down the stairs into the water. With a single, sharp impact and a familiar, echoing splash, the light disappeared into the consuming darkness below. And after what felt like an eternity of waiting in that haunting quiet, we finally mustered enough nerve to charge down the stairs, our shouts echoing against the cold stone walls. We reached the base of the water, leapt in, and shined our flashlights desperately down the hallway. The beams of light danced along the slick surface, revealing a secondary corridor beyond the generator, a hallway so completely consumed by darkness it seemed to exist in another realm. Then, in the midst of our scrambling, we caught a glimpse, a huge silhouette emerging slowly at the far end. It appeared as 2 massive barrels perfectly aligned next to one another, seemingly floating on the surface. For a split second, as if painted with a brush of dread, the figure paused, and then without warning, another huge splash, a violent rupture behind the barrels, shattered the silence. The barrels split apart, and the dark form advanced with chilling speed towards us. That was the final unbearable moment. We ran, abandoning our equipment and our bravado, and never returned to that forsaken place again. In the aftermath, as we huddled in the relative safety of daylight, we began piecing together what we had experienced. Some local lore hinted at a presence, a paranormal manifestation that might be tied to the building's long and tortured past. We never saw things clearly. Its appearance was fleeting and ambiguous, a blurry shifting form that left behind only the sound of splashes and the echo of a disturbance too deliberate to be natural. The evidence was subtle enough to be dismissed by a trick of the light or a trick of our minds, except for the undeniable truth that it was one we all shared. To me, it wasn't just merely an animal or a random accident. It felt like the building's history. Something paranormal was still there. And if I closed my eyes, I could almost hear the low, mournful reverberation echoing through the murky waters. And I really don't wish to know whatever the hell that is. It's been nearly a decade since this happened, but I still get goosebumps every time I talk about that night. I was catching up with an old friend recently when the memory came rushing back. It happened in the spring of 2016 when we were in high school, and messing around in abandoned buildings was our idea of a good time. But that night was different. That night something warned us. Edmonton, Alberta. More specifically, the decaying shell of the Charles Campbell Hospital. An abandoned building wrapped in rusted fencing, half-demolished walls, and a decade of ghost stories. The place was infamous. It had appeared on ghost hunting shows and online forums. People spoke of strange music echoing through empty halls, ghostly figures, and shadows that didn't belong. But the real horror wasn't the ghost stories. It was the truth behind the building's past. The Charles Campbell Provincial General Hospital operated from 1946 to 1996, and it was used as a tuberculosis sanatorium. And there were dark rumors and chilling testimonies, forced sterilizations, electroshock treatments, and unauthorized vaccine experiments, mostly carried out on First Nation patients, many of whom never left. Survivors have spoken of unmarked graves behind the building, mass burials of those who didn't make it out, and in 2021, ground-penetrating radar was brought in to search for these lost souls. But all of that came later. Back in 2016, none of that mattered to us. We were just kids chasing adrenaline. My friend and I had snuck into Campbell multiple times before. We knew the layout: busted windows, long hallways, walls tagged with graffiti, and each visit gave us weird vibes, cold spots, inexplicable echoes, the soft hum of what sounded like elevator music playing from nowhere. But we brushed it off. But this night, we all felt a bit weird from the start. The four of us hopped the perimeter fence and crept through the overgrown field behind the hospital. It was well past midnight. The way we usually entered is sneaking through a small access window near the back, but this time it had been barred shut. Fresh steel. The city must have caught on. Annoyed but not ready to call it quits, we started walking back across the field to leave when it happened. We were walking shoulder to shoulder, not saying much. The field wasn't pitch black. Streetlights from nearby homes cast a dim amber glow across the grass, enough to see where we were stepping. And then we heard a voice clear as day. "You know you shouldn't be here." It wasn't a shout, it wasn't an echo. It was right behind us, like someone had leaned in, lips practically touching our ears, and said it. All four of us spun around, but there was no one there. No movement, no shapes, no sound but the gentle blowing of the wind. Three of my friends didn't wait for an explanation, they just ran. But I froze. Something about the voice just felt wrong. And then, just for me, "If I were you, I'd run too." It was the same voice, but it grew a bit deeper. I don't remember making the choice to run. One second I was frozen and the next I was sprinting. I passed my friends and didn't look back and didn't stop until I hit the fence, practically throwing myself over it like my life depended on it. When we reached the car, we were all wide-eyed and shaking, trying to laugh it off, but no one really could. I told them what I heard after they ran, the second voice, and their faces changed. We tried to rationalize it. Maybe it was a homeless guy in the field, but none of it added up. It wasn't dark enough for someone to hide inches away from us without being seen. The grass was thin and the field was open. There were no bushes, no trees, no cover, no shadows to hide in. And that voice, it didn't come from a distance. It came from behind us, inside our space, inside our ears, like a whisper meant for only us to hear. And the part that still makes my skin crawl, that spot, that exact patch of field is where people claim the unmarked graves are buried, where patients were discarded and forgotten about, and laid to rest without names. That land isn't just earth, it's heavy. You can feel it. So was it just a weird night, or did we just step on someone's grave? I still don't know. I've never been back. I never will. The haunted building was a rumor that everyone had heard about. An old decaying structure that had been sinking into the ground for years. They said it was haunted. Blinds would inexplicably move, doors slam. Someone said they heard the walls whisper once. But no one went near it. It was condemned. No one was supposed to be there. Yet there I was on Halloween night, barely able to stand after hopping from party to party. The courtyard around the building was quiet. My friend and I had just smoked a joint and were laughing when we saw two guys walking towards the building with a strange, purposeful stride. There was something unnerving about them, like they knew something we didn't. One of them reached the door, and with a firm push, it swung open with a creak that echoed through the empty courtyard. The girl I was with froze. "Wait, it's unlocked? I tried it 1,000,000 times, it's always locked." The guy shrugged, as if it was nothing. "It is now," one of them said. They stepped inside and vanished into the darkness. But something about it felt off, like they didn't belong there. We sat in silence for a moment before we decided we had to check it out. Maybe it would be our only chance. My feet felt heavy as I stumbled over, the night air thickening around me. When we reached the door again, the latch clicked. It was locked. How could it be locked now? Frustrated, we stood there staring at the door. The two guys were standing at the edge of the courtyard staring into the distance. It felt like they'd been watching us the whole time, even though we hadn't seen them approach. One of them gave us a half smile, but his eyes were cold. "I don't know if you should go in there. It's pretty spooky," he said. We begged them to go back with us, and after a long moment they agreed. But when we reached for the door, it was locked. I could hear my heart thumping in my ears. I was starting to get paranoid, and the alcohol wasn't helping. The two guys seemed unbothered though, as though they expected it. "Ah man, guess we're not going in," one of them muttered, shaking his head. But as we stood there trying to figure out what to do next, one of them said something that made my blood run cold. "At least my dad didn't die when I was 3. It hit me like a slap in the face. I don't know why, but that line was the worst thing I'd ever heard. My own father had died when I was 3. It wasn't something I talked about, but it was part of me, a deep wound I carried. My stomach churned, and I felt my skin go cold. I looked at the guy stunned. He seemed oblivious, like he hadn't even realized the weight of his words. He glanced at me, then back to his friend. "Oh, awkward," he muttered, his face suddenly pale. And without a word, they turned and walked away. My drunken haze began to clear, and what was left was a cold, creeping sense of dread. It wasn't just the building, the strange event, it was them, the two guys. Like they had known, and now they were gone. I stood there for a long time, staring at the dark, empty building. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was lurking just beyond our sight. But I didn't stick around to find out. We left quick smart, and I've never returned since. Hey guys, it's Mort here and thank you so much for listening. Here's to hoping that you enjoyed tonight's Urbex stories. I love the stories about abandoned places, they're always quite creepy, but I've still to this day never had the courage to go exploring one myself. Maybe one day I'll be within your ranks. But for now, I hope you have an awesome night. More videos on screen. Huge thanks as always to the members and Patreons, names on screen, perks and description if you want to find out more. Have a good night.